Welcome to Superchargers. I'm Daniel Thomas. Let's go. G'day guys, my guest on this episode is Lincoln Stoller. Lincoln is a psychotherapist with a focus on learning, healing and growth. Lincoln's work challenges institutional knowledge, emphasizing emotion, intuition and insight. We get right into it. Here is my conversation with Lincoln Stoller. I heard in one of your other interviews talking a little bit about the therapy that you said everyone is or should be a therapist is what you said. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
To me, it comes down to learning, how you learn or what you choose to learn about. And some of the ways we learn, one of the popular ways we learn is projecting. We project, it's similar to drama. We create a scene and we live it, or we often relive it, and we try to figure it out. And in the process, we create the characters. Really, all the characters in your life are somewhat of your own creation because they're what you choose to understand and communicate with. And so we create these scenes and dramas and storylines, and we try to live them, and they always go, if not sideways, in a skew, because, well, two simple reasons. People are complicated, and we don't really know who we are, and we keep changing, and so do they. And we like to have this program where we develop our lives in a direction and our partners and colleagues and family and community develop along with us. But partly because the world changes and partly because we change, it doesn't work that way. And relationships come and relationships go, or so we think. But they often, they're sticky. And they don't entirely go. And they don't entirely come. So we deal with a sort of chaos. And some people maybe, well, again, it's sort of cultural. Some cultures are a little more peripatetic than others. Typically Australians, South Africans, Europeans tend to wander around. Americans don't. They just sort of go from state to state, East Coast, West Coast. And in Canada, where I'm living now, a lot of people come in as immigrants. And in my heritage, my grandparents came from, I guess, what's called Eastern Europe, but I don't know where the line really should be drawn. And now my son, I have two sons, one's 26 and the other's 14. They're very different because they come from different sort of cultures, different mothers, different nations. And I just took my young son to visit I don't know where you wanted me to go with this, but I'm taking it to some near-term direction, near-term goal. I took my son to visit some relatives in San Francisco last week, and I was given a biography of one of my great-granduncles. I know my grandfather had 14 kids, and I don't know any of them, but, grandfather sits way back. And I was just curious because my son is going to high school and he tries to do well in school in spite of my telling him it's bullshit. And in this story of my great-granduncle, it just struck me that he wanted to go to school too, but the family only had one pair of shoes and had three sons, and you had to have shoes to go to school, so he didn't go to school because he didn't have shoes. And it just struck me how different it was only 100 years. Well, maybe it was 150 years ago, but still. And for us, like you and I, who move from culture to culture, it's even more unpredictable. At least I find so. And so now we look at, so the big thing that's coming on my radar is the US election, because it's such a dramatic conflict between democracy and fascism. And I use those words carefully. And, how do you talk to people about this? I generally do this. Podcasts and blog posts and mailing lists and writing books. And I got to the point where, and having clients as a psychotherapist. So there are sort of all directions. I kind of look at the newspaper, but it's such thin garbage that I don't read it with much depth. And I really like, well, maybe like you, I don't know enough about you to say this, but maybe like you, I'm trying to figure things out. So I was into physics, and that's interesting. And it's frustrating because you can get answers, but they don't really mean anything. And then you can be in psychology and you can get meaningful answers that you can't really figure out because everyone's pointed in a different direction. And so some sort of conglomeration of all this, the kids, the parents, the clients, the society, the politics, where does it leave us? Us, like, what are we, like, you and I are like information sponges, looking for the the most substantial information. So you say you found it in family or in fatherhood. And I would say similarly, I find it in dealing with people. I mean, fatherhood is not that different from being a counselor,
Mm.
except my son doesn't pay me, and I don't give him as much shit as I give to my clients. And I'm not expected to. I mean, that's what I say. As a counselor, I'm supposed to say everything that no one else would say, because whatever, they're obliged for one reason or another. I'm obliged to be disruptive, and unusual.
I,
And I guess I'm pretty good at that. So that's the answer to your question. That's why everybody should be a therapist.
I have a similar tussle with the education system and sometimes biting my tongue in terms of like, or struggling with my son in terms of this is important, but there's a lot of bullshit at the same time. I find it a really hard line to ride in terms of my opinions on this. And when I'm disappointed in the things that happen at school, how do you go about that? Do you have a no filter? You just say this is bullshit, or do you? It's a tricky line to kind of
I don't
find.
think it's a tricky line. It's it's an area I have a lot of mm, mm, emotion and enthusiasm and direction and certitude about. So I'm happy to answer your question, but I would try to answer it in less than 24 hours, as I would probably get into if I had the time. And I say this, it is bullshit. And I think your job is to say that loud and clear and to say why. So when my son brings homework back about the French Revolution and the English fur traders, I say, throw that shit away and rewrite the question
Mm,
in a way that's relevant for you today. I'm not saying no questions are important. I'm saying those questions are unimportant. Those are yesterday's questions written by God knows who, not even historians, just people who write textbooks to fill your time. And, he asked me these questions, and I say, it's like the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Universe. I say, the answer is 42,
mm.
and just write that down for every of their questions, 42. And then tell them why. Tell them, what's important is what's going on today. What's
Mm,
important in your life? Why is art difficult, or is art difficult? And obviously, the art teacher thinks art is impossible because otherwise they'd be an artist. But they
exactly.
studied art and they failed and
Mm,
became an art teacher. So they probably know something about how difficult art is. And another aspect that you can take is that you can learn from everybody, even the prejudiced, racist, negative people. If you get on their side, they're often very anxious to tell you why they feel the way they feel.
mm,
I want to write a book. I'm not sure I will, but since I have so many books, I now want to write about how to learn from bad teachers.
mm.
Since 95% of our teachers are not very good, or 95% of the people we learn from, even though they're not teachers, are also not very good at communicating. So, how do you learn from those people?
That's
And this
actually
is what I
an
think you have to tell them.
mm, that's actually an awesome reframe. That's really cool in terms of okay, bad teacher, but what can you learn from that? And then just another small example when we were looking for a guitar teacher, the first guy was unbelievably bad, but now when I came in and kind of we found an awesome one who has ignited his passion. The other teacher may have killed his passion, but I think with that kind of reframe you're saying, it was actually important for him to see that initial. We've talked about it to have that experience with the initial teacher, and then to have the experience with the grade teacher. And so when they're both teaching you different things, that's actually really sound advice because it's like, okay, what can you okay if you can learn that this art teacher is perhaps bitter or um why and like you say, how does that reflect the struggle of art? Then he's learning something, like you say, from the worst as opposed to saying, oh no, he's got a bad teacher, he's not going to learn anything. Actually, it's teaching him just as much. I haven't actually thought of it like that, so that's I thank you for that.
Almost teaching you more because she's saying, watch out. This is a minefield. And if you wander into art or anything with this idealistic perception, then either two things will happen. You'll be rejected and disappointed, or you'll be shepherded and channeled into a certain mindset that will satisfy what other people need, like becoming an interior decorator or, a
And
designer of crappy stuff.
it's interesting you say that because I went into architecture. It was the creativity. I went through the whole. I worked in architecture for 10 years before I went to left it to be in the band. But it was the creative side of architecture that appealed to me. And then when I was in the industry and I realized like 5% of the industry was actually really creative, I burnt out and I suffered crippling anxiety. And it just I had to break away from that because it was I had some projects that were quite fulfilling creatively, but they were few and far between. And going to London as a musician was me kind of really realigning myself with a more fulfilling creative, trying to realign myself creatively. But like you say, I fell into the design industry in a way, you know.
Well, did you know that I started in architecture when I was 9?
Oh, wow.
Because my
Is,
father was an architectural photographer and he took me on
uh,
his jobs, and I would carry his cases around from ages of 9 to 14 when the job was small enough to carry a case that was under 30 pounds. He would take me, and I learned photography and architecture and architects. I didn't learn the business side because he had other people handling that, but um, architectural photography it's like journalism for pornography,
mm,
because architecture is sort of pornographic in the sense that you're selling to people's enthusiasms and instincts, but you're having to make it into a manageable engineering project.
mm.
It is sort of debased in the conflicts of all the people involved: the clients, the contractors, the marketers, um, the engineers. And if you look at who the architects were that my father dealt with, all the great architects of the early 20th century, most of them are odd people,
Mm.
somewhat
A lot of a
unregulated.
lot of double lives going on in architecture.
Yeah, and you'd say, would you want to be? So I'm writing a book now about my father and his relationship to these architects, and none of them come across as people you'd, well, with maybe two exceptions, Marcel Breuer and Eero Saarinen, seem to be kind of reasonable guys, but the other guys were not
S-
reasonable
So
guys.
was he an architect himself, or he was purely a photographer who moved
He
into
was
the
purely a
architect?
photographer, trained in architecture, but it's different. That he would say that when he went on jobs with architects, they were useless because they couldn't see the things in two dimensions. They
Mm,
saw things in three dimensions and said, "Oh, you should take pictures that show all aspects of our work. And he said, no, 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 that's not how a viewer sees things. They see things in a very limited way, so the photograph has to lead their eye, and too much complexity just is incomprehensible.
Mm.
So it's a cross between engineering and graphic design. Architectural photography is. So that was interesting. And most of his most famous work is in black and white. And it's interesting, all that stuff about how shades are confusing and how black can look white if it's put next to a darker black or a darker shade. So all this interesting visual
But so
illusions.
you were kind of curious to some of the tyrants that he kind of met, like the architectural kind of dictators.
Yeah, like Frank Lloyd Wright was his sort of mentor, but they didn't talk about the same thing. Wright was talking about architecture, and my father was talking about the photography of Wright's architecture. But they got along because they were also of different generations. So my father was younger, Wright was older, and so forth. Anyway, and my brother, so all of my family are architectural artists in the sense that they deal with shapes and forms and sculpture and contrasts and modern art. My brother is an architect, and I have this background of experience with my father. My sister ran his business, the photography business. And my mother, who's the source of many of my problems, was an artist of only an artist. She was not a very effective mother to me. She was an
Mm.
artist, all everywhere in her imagination,
So
which
she,
is interesting for your comment about artists being an impossible profession. Because I do think that if you're too much of an artist, you lose contact with grim reality and you float off into your creative imagination.
yeah, so she just struggled with the practicality of things because she was always in kind of dreamland,
Always in dreamland.
always in
Yeah.
dreamland. That's something I've struggled with, to be honest. I think coming to Germany has been good in terms of becoming more practical. Like because it's very like here it's very especially running your own business things, you have to be very on it in a
Yeah.
different way. It's very laid back in Australia. So I think coming to Germany has helped me with that kind of balancing the practicality, which has helped me in fatherhood a lot because you have to um do the shit, that needs to be done. So
Well, let me ask you a personal question. This is totally, projection. You look like you have some well, I would say German, Teutonic genetic background. And, all Australians were imported anyway. So, like maybe you were returning to some aspect of your roots when you came back to Germany.
you're very spot on there. I don't in the terms of the DNA. The DNA is 42% Scottish, I learned last year.
Oh, really? Uh-huh.
Very yeah, Scottish or grandparents from like the Outer Hebrides, Scott from a
Mm.
Scottish island. But it's really interesting you say that because my mother was born here, on a military base. I lost her when I was 21, and I've ended up living in Germany in the land that she was born, and now I'm very much, as you are, I'm very much diving into my mother's story and getting into that, and being here has made that all the more visceral. So it's funny how, it to me it seems like a random succession of events like we're talking about led me to Germany, but ultimately I've ended up returning to the place where my mother was born. So part of me is like, I think I had to be here. Um, so yeah, you've really hit the nail.
Mm. Well, I think there's, and I'm not doing. If I hit the nail, it's somewhat of a formula. I do believe that almost everyone carries this funny legacy that's not entirely genetic, or maybe it's epigenetic. I don't know where they learn this. Oh, there's maybe someday we'll figure this out. There's this factoid that the children of people who endured adversity tend to be more resilient,
Mm,
even though they didn't endure the adversity themselves. So Oh, you could say, oh, well, they just learned it from their disciplinarian parents, but that's not enough. The, the, the resilience they have is more than just behavioral. It's, I don't know, it's more. So I always ask, to the distraction of many of my clients, where did they come from? What's their heritage? And, most of us don't really know very far back. One generation, two, maybe three, little bit. Um, but like it's even hard to connect. So I'm like you, curious, and curiosity drives me, and it gets me in trouble because I don't. I'm not satisfied with simple answers, and I probe and annoy people. I mean, okay, it makes a good attitude as a therapist because I'm always okay with getting paid for it, but I don't have any social life because I'll do this with everyone. I don't
Mm.
care who you are and how socially appropriate I'm supposed to be.
How does intuition and instinct come to play into play for you when you're dealing with, because my experience in therapy was, it was very important. It was very, I needed a solid few years there to really like have someone take a very objective look and piece things together and offer like, challenge me. Uh, but it was very intellectual. It was
Mm,
very heady.
hmm
And also being in Germany now, it's very this is the land of Freud and so on.
Kant,
So
yeah.
yeah, so I've done other things that have really helped sort of train the instinct and the intuition a little bit more like a muscle, and that's been so helpful in a different way in terms of getting out of the head stuff. So how does that come into play with you and the work that you're doing?
I think I have a prejudice to being intellectual, and I probably relate most effectively initially with people who are intellectual. The people don't need that. If they're already intellectual, they hardly need me to be more intellectual. But, that's how we start our relationships. We try to get consonants. And then we grow by growing out of that consonance into areas where there's either dissonance or disagreement or conflict or creative possibility. And I feel it's a bad idea when people give up on each other and divorce in marriage or isolate themselves socially or in family disputes. And I think when the going gets rough, that's when that's when you really want to be involved because that's where you're shedding your skin and things are raw and there's change and you're confused and it's frustrating. And that's where you grow. You fill in and understand. So, on a simple level, I tell people there's intellect and there's emotion, and then there's your neurology, which is a kind of like firmware that's been habituated to certain things. And then there's honesty and psychopathy and addiction in both substances and attitudes. And if you're coming to me, I used to think that people who get therapy were the weak ones who needed help. But I've come to change that quite a bit. And now I think the people who come to therapy are the strong ones
Mm.
who are ready to change, where everyone else is, hiding under their mortgage and their lawns and their country club or their whatever bingo club. And I'm dealing with people who are largely looking for, well, I mean, these are the people who are uh, the performance people who want to perform better. There are also the mentally ill people who are just tired of, getting the short end of the stick and want to try to figure out how to do better. And they're a different group, obviously, because you could say that their problems are either more, structural. I mean, I'm not sure, but I guess you'd say, okay, if you've got chronic anxiety, then you've got something to work on. Or if it's like attention deficit or schizophrenia or paranoia or psychopathy. All right, these are problems that are going to be different than an entrepreneur or even different than a person who's struggling in their marriage. They're all different. So the answer to your question is I say, okay, look, we can talk about facts and evidence and the scene you've painted and the characters you've introduced me to. Or we can talk about your feelings, which are hopefully uh, enlightening in their chaos and conflict. And we can say, why do you feel this way? And what triggers you to feel this way? And we can go at that through dreams. Dreams are hard. Like
Mm.
all of this stuff can be hard. You got to work at it. And if you're already strung out, maybe you don't need more exercises. But still, what you come to me with is usually not what's the most productive thing to work on because you've been
Mm.
struggling with that for ages. And like, I don't have any magic bullet here. Like, yeah, we can talk about it and I can tell why I think you're full of shit, but okay, you're probably got your set mind. And I want to talk about how do you feel and why do you feel? You're a little more flexible in that, I find. And then the third thing, so emotions, intellect are the first two. Psychedelics are into an emotional area, I think. And then the third thing is your neurology. And I hammer on this more and more these days. There is a habitual, maybe addictive tendency people have to respond to things in certain ways. So the art teacher probably could have used brain training when it came to their frustrations in being a professional artist, because they probably had certain frustrations that overwhelmed them when they confronted the reality of the art market and how it failed to deliver and support them. And you could say, oh, well, it was a business issue. Well, no, it was an emotional issue. And the brain training, which I'm trying to get at, I'm skirting around it because it's hard to describe. Well, let me just try to describe it directly. If you think of your brain, this is a kind of a bullshit analogy, but like a clock, it's got certain mechanisms in it. Oh, that's fair enough. You respond to certain things, you're attentive to certain things, you see certain things, you're triggered by certain things, and you have certain abilities to understand and form words and appreciate other people's nuance and move your body and be responsive to the movement of other people's bodies in the ways that make you feel comfortable, like the bus driver who gave you the cold shoulder when you said you were from Australia. I mean, this like, and the Germans in the bar who were making Hitler jokes. Um, you know that you've learned to be reactive in certain ways, and these ways are going to include or exclude you. And how far are you going to go if you're uncomfortable making Hitler jokes? Well, okay, you may think that's not too important, but maybe it is important because it maybe determines whether you're accepted as one of them. Can you make fun of our failures, or are you still an outsider who's walking on eggshells? That's going to be a big difference when it comes to who's going to reveal their inner thoughts to you. Because if
Mm.
you're walking on eggshells, they'll say, oh, fuck him, he doesn't really get it, which is true. Um, and so some of this is not just emotional or intellectual. It's how you've programmed yourself. So you can actually look at your brain waves. This is where it comes down to it. And you can just, it may sound stupid, but it's true. You can lower the intensity of certain brain waves in certain parts of your head because they reflect certain organs in your brain's activity. So typically, here's the most famous example. If you drive an ice pick through the right orbital of your skull, you'll scramble that part of your brain that deals with fear and anger, and you'll become a docile vegetable. And this was called a prefrontal lobotomy, and it must have given to many thousands of people, to the great success of the people who were handling them, and the irremediable damage done to them. And the guy who invented this was given a Nobel Prize. So you don't actually have to drive the ice pick through your prefrontal lobe. You can actually put uh, contacts on your cranium over that area of your skull and listen to how loud that part of your brain is shouting. And you can train yourself to be more calm in that regard, and it will make you less angry and less uh, reflexive, not reflective, reflexive.
Reflexive. Yeah.
Um, and that could be a great help to people who are over anxious or overreactive. And so you could talk all day about your emotions and your thoughts and your parents. But if you're overreactive, then every time you get triggered, and this is like I have a schizophrenic client, and every time he gets triggered, he finds himself in police custody and he doesn't understand why. And I tell him, well, it's because there's some things you do you don't even know. You get angry and you get combative and you get frightening. And you can imagine it's pretty easy to frighten people. All you have to have is like a clownish smile and a menacing posture, and
Mm.
people will run like hell. Um, and these are subtle things. What is the facial expression giving, and what is the body? Are you tense and smiling? It's like weird. So some of this stuff can be trained at a neural level, and it's very difficult to train it indirectly by conversation. And it's also difficult for me to convey to you and your listeners that it's there and trainable, and it's not an unmoved part of your personality.
Mm.
So, and it's subtle. Not everything can change, and some things are easier than others.
You're talking about essentially quiet.
Anxiety,
Yeah, and quiet.
anxiety,
Yeah,
reactiveness,
reactiveness.
stuff like that.
Uh, you also said awareness is a big part of enlightenment, and I agree with you on that. It always, like on this show, a lot of what I've talked about has always come back to awareness, self-reflection, awareness. You can't address something until the awareness is there. Like there has to be an awareness around something. So you think the two go hand in hand. Call it enlightenment and awareness. You can't have one without the other.
I take it apart. Awareness starts with perception, so you want to be able to be sensitive to things. You know, small changes in tone for a musician, small changes in color and boundaries for an visual artist, small changes in intonation for a verbal artist. But you also need to be able to understand them. It's not enough to see them. So, for example, an autistic person typically, or typical autism, is very reactive to change and very averse to disruption. I mean, this is typical of autistic kids. They're hyper organized and very rigid. So they're very sensitive to change, but they're not very good at putting it in perspective and going with it. It's disruptive at a deep and emotional level. So, yes, you want to be perceptive, but you also want to be, well, various words, resilient, uh, insightful, appreciative, communicative. So there's a whole level. So perception is the beginning, but then you've got to be able to manage it
Can I
in many
ask?
ways.
Can I ask how you address that with autistic patients? How you address when disruption comes in
I don't know that answer because I haven't had them, but I would
okay.
work on it and I would try to reduce their reactivity. I would try that. And I would try it either neurally because we'd get brain maps of what areas are overreacting, and that could be helpful if it showed there was some. If it didn't, then I'd go on to the next thing. Can we talk it out? Is it a traumatic? But autism is not traumatic. I think that's pretty clear. It's kind of born and can be discerned pretty early. So I don't think it would be traumatic. But you could say, I don't know. I haven't worked with autistic kids. I've worked with troubled kids, emotionally troubled kids, and then of course it's pretty clear it's emotional. And usually, I mean, this is the sad truth is that a lot of people's families are poor poor environments to grow up in,
Mm.
or it doesn't take many mistakes on a parent's part to injure a person. And with a lot of mistakes, a person can get a growing person, a young person can get very injured. And by injury, I don't just mean emotionally upset. I mean actually uh, deformed
Mm.
emotionally, so that they can't learn, can't remember, and can't experience learning effectively. So yeah, trauma is, I don't know, I think trauma is somewhat straightforward. I mean, it's not easy to solve, but if you can identify it, I think it's pretty straightforward. Well, I don't know. Maybe that's.
I've said it before, but it's interesting. Like, I also had some EFT when I was younger. A counselor recommended some um the rapid eye movement. Is it EFT?
EMDR.
Sorry, EMDR, not EFT, EMDR. She recommended that. I'd only seen her brief, and I went with it, and I'd had some significant traumas in my childhood, so I expected perhaps that some of that stuff was going to come out. But when she did it, what came out was me falling off a skateboard that I had
Mm-hmm.
pushed away and put in the dark closet somewhere and just completely repressed that memory, because what had happened was I fell on my face on a basketball court and I cut up my face and I had to walk down the main street home with my face covered in blood. And I became very self conscious at that point because I
Yeah.
was hiding my face. So that falling off the skateboard doesn't seem that, you know, that bigger thing, but the impact of that in terms of me being self conscious was quite huge. And so when I did this EMDR, I went through that experience again, and I felt like it had been sort of taken off my shoulders. So that was one of the more beneficial things I've done for that. But I guess what I'm saying is, the trauma of having a toy snatched away from you, or the biggest traumas, there's a I was surprised that that's what came out.
It's a good example of the cross between neural and psychological, because EMDR is, oh, it's not recognized widely, but it is a neural retraining. I mean, obviously, if you can make an emotional change, but so we should say what it is for people that don't know.
Mm.
Roughly, it's recalling traumatic events while you move your eyes to the left and right in a certain cadence that's fairly slow, like 1 second each. And you've got this protocol of not directly seeing or thinking about the trauma itself, but putting yourself at some distance from it while you keep going with your eyes, doing this lateral motion left and right. And through that process, which is neural, the left and right motions, left and right parts of your brain are being engaged, and the trauma, which is being approached in a somewhat circumspect and safe way, starts, in a simplistic picture, settling in a way that you can confront. And I have a similar story to yours. I should do some EMDR on this one too. In the abject stupidity of youth, we thought it would be fun to lift a manhole cover and see what was underneath. And we got some crappy piece of metal and some sticks and we're prying it up. And then the terrible thing happened for me is I put my fingers under the manhole cover to lift it up, and the sticks broke and it went down. And I'm lucky to have my fingers left.
Mm.
But I yanked my fingers out at the last minute, and then I had to walk home with my hands dripping with
Mm.
blood. And the memory is traumatic. Not, not because of the blood, not because of the manhole cover. I don't know what the fuck is traumatic about it, because the people I was with and the fact that I wasn't thinking it, they weren't really my friends, and life had failed, and my whole concept of self nearly was extinguished. And so here I am now. Like, I must have been 7. So what, this would be 60 years ago. And it's
Same
still
age.
pretty fresh
Mm.
in my memory
Mm.
and unresolved. and it's going to sit there like a loose wire until something. Maybe it'll eventually get buried, or maybe something will come out.
Mm. It's not about it going away. It's how it
I don't really
sits.
know what it's about.
Mm.
Yeah, it's got deep
Uh,
connections to other stuff, I
mm.
suppose.
In turn, you mentioned dreams earlier. Do you, do you believe dreams are there to be interpreted, or they just are what they are?
I believe dreams are there for you to explore what you don't understand. They are the laboratory of confusion in which you put together how you're going to feel about shit. And that's why they're so odd and disjointed, because it's like a kitchen in which you're trying to produce all the bad recipes. You're trying to go through, I mean, how do you get a good recipe? You add a little of this, you add a little of that, you taste it. But in dreams and in psychology, there's a lot of monsters and a lot of threats and possibilities. And in order to understand them, it's like spices you never want to taste. But in order to live fully, you have to understand where they come from. So in dreams, you've got sex with your all the inappropriate people, actions that are completely inappropriate, um, frightening things, rarely and quite um, rewardingly, interactions with people that are positive. I tell people, if you're going to do dream work, first you got to start remembering your dreams. This is like the
Mm.
story of perception. First you got to perceive. And then you have to start to not interpret the dream, but interpret what you're feeling. So I don't think the dream is telling you anything except chaos. The dreams are always a mixture of positive and negative, lost and found, placed and lost. And what you would like to do in dream work is to fully engage yourself with it and feel that you're a willing participant, not a frightened, resistant participant. And I think the more you can adopt the willing, accepting, tolerant attitude, the more you'll remember the dreams and the more you'll be able to explore them. Um, and at length, or in some cases, you'll be able to interact with them. So, for example, you will be able to speak to your dream characters, who are sort of actors in your mind, there with a kind of script to play a role. And if you can speak to them, which sometimes is possible, they can answer you off script, and they can. Uh, oh, so two stories. I read this one story, and I had a similar story. So the story I read was a person sat down on a park bench with a dream character and turned to them and said, "You know, this is a dream." And the character said, "I know this. That I'm dreaming too." And it like blew them away. And then I had uh, an experience. I said my mother was a troubled person in my life because she was absent as an artist, always dreaming about her art. And since she died many years ago, I've had many more positive experiences with her because now I can actually talk. I can have a better conversation with her in my dreams than I ever had in real life.
Amazing.
Because in real life, it was stuck. Real
Mm.
life was just fucking stuck.
But
But in my dream,
that's kind of irony that she was in dreamland, so that was the place where you could best
well,
converse.
so we had this conversation, and I said to her, you seem really happy now." In my dream, I said this to her. And I said, "Where are you?" And she said, "Oh, you silly, I don't exist." And I was just so freaked out because, of course, in a dream, you
Mm.
think this is
It's
real.
real. Mm.
And now I'm told that I'm in a world that doesn't exist. And I kind of woke up in shock. And I don't know quite what to make of that. But it was an interaction that did something important for me.
And you think that came from that willingness, perhaps?
I guess I try to be willing always in my dreams. And when I say this is why it's hard to do dream work, you have to have time. You
Mm.
have to have sleep.
Yeah, it's
And
not an
then in addition to
instant.
getting
Yeah.
sleep, you need to have time. So I always give myself This is good to be a psychotherapist. I can arrange my schedule. I don't have to be at work at 8 o'clock or whenever. So I can give myself 15 minutes to feel lost or discombobulated in the morning. And that's what it takes. And you don't necessarily figure anything out. You just let it settle like dust or mud. And then you sort of enter the day in your gumboots, tracking the mud into your daily life. I don't know what it tells you, maybe nothing, but it's part of your psyche that is processing. And
S-
it's the processing that
The
is
processing.
productive,
Mm.
right? Not
Things need to be
necessarily what you
processed.
figured out.
Yeah.
They just, you know. So what, so one of the processes I'm trying to process is my last wife, who I think was crazy in a psychopathic way, but I still love her. But I have to stop because I only love who I think I know. And the person, the real people, like all real people, has more levels. And a psychopath has these disjointed levels where they don't connect who they are. Typical like serial killers are often very nice people if you're on the right side of them. And serial killers aren't actually very mean. They're just curious about what you look like when you're dead, which is like insane, of course. But psychopathic people have these strange breaks between what makes sense and what doesn't. And you may know them in one world, but that's not all who they are. And then, like my ex-wife, I can wonder, why is she like that? Why was she like that? I think it's she was abused sexually as a child. But that's not her answer, it's my answer. So uh, some of my dreams put me in a mode which remind me of how I should be. I should be more defensive. I should be more distant. I should question myself more. So in this case, the question is love. Can you love a person who can't love you back? Well, obviously the answer is yes. Should you? Probably not, because love should be a reciprocal thing. And when it's a one-sided thing, there's going to be a problem.
It's torturous. Yeah.
So that dream is a kind of ongoing dream work. I'm
Interesting.
sorry.
Mm.
That's I can't give you a good answer because I think the nature of dream work doesn't give good answers. That's important. It's not there to give answers. And that addresses your questions. Should dreams be interpreted? Well, maybe, sort of, but they shouldn't be concluded. They're meant to be open questions. They don't give you answers, they give you questions. That's what I would say about dreams.
Yeah, and the
So
willing.
are you ready?
Mm.
Ready for that?
Eh,
You know?
Yeah, and the willingness thing is cool too, because often there is this fear aspect. So how do you still be willing when you wake up in a cold sweat or whatever it may be?
Let me interrupt to say, I had a client who said that she had a repetitive nightmare in which she was in bed and a dark figure was approaching and it had a knife and it would stab her repeatedly in dreams. The dream would repeat, and in a terrifying way. So I said to her, okay. And so I went to this hypnotic thing, like imagine you're back in the thing and relax and disembody yourself and recreate this dream character. And they're standing by the center of your bed. And now I said to her, now have them reach out with their other hand, not the one holding the knife, and show you what's in their other hand.
Mm.
And she said it opened its hand and it had this jewel in it, this gem. And I thought, great, work over. We're done. Dream's done.
Mm.
That's where you need. It had a knife in one hand
And a
and a
jewel in the other.
jewel in
Yeah.
the other. Okay, so okay, now it's clear. We have to go there, or you have to go there. I don't even know you have to go there. Maybe it's just opened, the dichotomy, right? So that now it's not so much one-sided.
Architecturally, it's also cool how in dreams buildings are just fully formed and like crazy. Like you could sit there trying to design a building and you have a dream and the thing is just like complete. Like where the heck does that come from? It- it's the worlds you're talking about. It's the characters are there, the world is there, it's all built. Is
Well, wait a
everything.
minute. Let me make an interjection here. This is very pertinent to the idea of perception. You think the building is fully formed, but This is a good question. How much of the building did you actually see in your dream? And how
Mm.
much did you think you saw?
Yeah, it's like a 3D model. If you just build the front, but the back's not there to, because
Right.
that's all you need to do to save time. Yeah, maybe you're just seeing the corner and you think it's fully full. Yeah.
But look at how your eye works. You don't take in everything. Your eye has a very small area of focus, like the size of
Mm.
your thumb at arm's length. And outside of that area of focus, everything's blurry. It never bothers you. You move that focal area around to the important points in your visual field, and you kind of blur in, you paint in all the rest. You know it's there. You don't have to look at it. You don't believe that the windows you didn't look at really are malformed, fuzzy, melting pieces of glass. You know they're real windows. You check out a few and then you say, I see the building. But how much did you really see? Not
Mm.
really very much. And this goes for everything, people's faces, environment, walking across the street. You
But
make these inferences.
perception seems to be a theme in our discussion. Keeps
Yeah,
keeps coming
but
back.
and then it becomes the question of how much do you know from what you see and how much did you infer and how much of it is real. So like my relationship with the ex-wife, how much do I see and how much do I know and how much do I understand? And so you Australian and Germany, how much do you see? How much do you know? How much do you understand? And if you wanted to change that, what would you do? I would say to my clients, you drop your preconceptions and you courageously step into the realm you don't understand. What's going to happen then? Well, you can't expect to be accepted. You can't expect to behave properly or do all the right things. But if you're lucky, you'll get some feedback and you'll learn from experiences that might not be comfortable to you or other people because everything's supposed to be organized. But if you want to learn, you're going to have to go into disorganization
Hmm.
where the boundary is crossed.
I think here every day it feels like I publicly bomb trying to speak German, but I've lent into it now. Like I used to curl up in a ball, but now I embrace it. The public kind of bombing of trying to every day. There's faux pas. There's complete, and now I just lean into it. Because you mentioned resilience earlier on. I think my resilience has equipped me to build a life here. I think you need a certain level of resilience to really build a life here. I've lost you. You're talking. Are you searching for something, or are you dealing with
Yes,
a client?
ich, ich bin ein Berliner is
Yes,
the famous
the Kennedy.
malapropism. Yes,
Yeah, yeah. Ich bin
that's what
ein
it's saying.
Berliner.
Yeah,
Yeah, which is that's a tough one. Like we're all in terms of you're accepted. I'm but yeah, there's growth in the public bombing. The faux pas I've made are hilarious, leaning into what you're saying, stepping into that realm, and I've fully done that, but I have absolutely fallen flat on my face numerous times.
it may be
So
your skill.
I think, yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think Eddie Murphy made a whole profession out of speaking Japanese badly.
Well, my classic here once was I was working in the Hard Rock Cafe selling T-shirts here in Hamburg, and the German word for shrink. I'm gonna stuff this up trying to tell you, but is laufen. Like so, if something shrinks in the wash. So I was trying to tell a customer, be careful when you buy this T-shirt because it shrinks. So I said, Vorsicht mit dem Einlauf. Einlauf instead of laufen means enema. So I said to this customer, be careful with your enema when he was buying this T-shirt. And I walked away and he started laughing with chuckling with his mate. And I was like, why? And he came over and he said, look, I got to tell you, like Laufen and Einlauf, quite different. But that's how fine it is. Einlauf,
Mhm.
Laufen, that's how fine the line is of falling on your face and offending somebody or getting it right. With again, perception, no perception or like perspective of what you've just done, because you're not understanding the words that are coming out of your mouth.
But the good thing is that you're unlikely to actually hit a landmine that is offensive. It'll be funny because it's wrong, but it won't be offensive because
Devastating.
it won't have
The power.
the power, right?
Yeah. They know this is they're like, he's trying, that's sweet, so it's not with the force.
Right.
Did you say? Another thing, I mean, I could really talk to you for hours.
All right,
Another thing.
let's nail something.
Let's nail some. All right. What about connection to animals? I like these stories I heard you tell. One was you were scuba diving and you were next to a shark and you were
Mm,
you were with the shark and it kind of just went away after some time. And then there was the other one where you're in the air and you were with a
mm.
hawk and you were sussing each other out with the hawk. I liked that there was the under the water and in the sky and these two animals. I personally I love the scene in the Life of Pi movie from the book where at the end
Mhm.
the boy
Yeah.
looks to the tiger as if we've established an emotional relationship here and the tiger just walks off. Like the tiger just and you like, does the tiger have an emotion there? I don't know if we're going to nail it, but I'm interested in that, what you think of this connection to animals.
I have to step back and say I've always been interested in connecting to the four elements. Of course, they're not four elements, but air, earth, sky, and water.
Mm.
And in those different elements, I think there's different concepts. There are. If you're going to be an animal that lives in one of those elements, the world is different. So one of my nightmares would be to be a whale in which the world had no boundaries and visibility was short and everything was the same.
Mm.
I think I'd go nuts. That would be like being in a locked-in personality to me. But to a whale, apparently, they can speak over tens of miles with each other. And we've now recognized that they actually have a language in which they name each other and address each other. We don't know what they say. We barely recognize the names they use for each other. But it seems fair and reasonable, given their size and their evolutionary place, that they have communication. I mean, it gets back to what we were talking about, perception and understanding. We have language and we think of things in terms of language. But if you were a whale, we couldn't understand the language because it wouldn't have anything like our words. Walls? No, nothing like walls. Space? Completely different.
Mm.
Um, Society? Unrecognizable. Food? I mean, I can't think of anything in our world that would be similar to a whale's, except perhaps being killed by a boat. And so then you get into areas where animals have more similarity to us, like domestic pets.
There's an explorative nature to whales, isn't there? They're kind of exploring.
I don't know.
But again, it's
I don't know.
perception. It's perception again. What's the whale's perception
And
is,
they're
yeah.
different whales because, like, around here we have the killer whales, and they have a particular attitude. As a swimmer, you're not really supposed to get very close to them because they don't behave the way you would think they should as friends.
Mm.
And they have this relationship with sharks. They like to kill sharks, and they know how to do it. And I was once sitting on the side of a road and standing on the side of it was Yosemite Valley. A coyote came out of the bushes from nowhere, and I was shocked to see it. And it reached down into the grass and it grabbed a snake and killed the snake and then walked away.
So it perhaps helped you.
Uh, well, no, I don't think it was a dangerous snake, but I think the coyote just makes a profession of killing snakes. I didn't eat it; it just killed it. But it was such a odd trifecta of snake, coyote, and human
Mm.
being, where the human being unusually had no clue as to what was going on. And I've had other run-ins with animals. I was sleeping outside in my house in New York, just on a pallet when a bear and her two cubs came up, and something spooked them, and the cubs ran up the tree, and the mother bear was wandering around me, and I was fucking freaked out because you're not supposed to get between a mother and her cubs,
Mm.
especially when you're like tied into a sleeping bag. So I just like froze until finally the cubs came down of their own and everybody walked away. And so and I have more bear stories and more animal stories
Was
and
that
so
in
forth.
Brooklyn or?
No, it was in, there are no bears in Brooklyn, to my knowledge. It was, a few hours outside in the Catskill Mountains.
We could trade
Um,
animal stories. Like growing up in Australia, I'd pick an animal,
oh, Australia is famous for its
pick an animal, pick
nasty
it,
animals.
and
Spiders, for one.
I've got like that's what I say to the Germans because I get asked this question every week. Oh, the dangerous animals, and I'm like, pick an animal, and then when I tell them a story, then they don't ask me anymore.
That's right. Yeah, my
But
Australian friend says he's been chased out of the bathroom by these wandering spiders.
the best, the best is when you're in the shower and you just sense. Speaking of senses, and so you just sense, and then you turn around and it's there. But yeah, let's nail something to bring it home. What do you think is like a real pressing issue at the moment that people could perhaps challenge themselves with? I mean, we've touched on a lot of things in terms of like being willingness in dreams, stepping into uncomfortable realms. Is there just like a practical challenge that has benefited you or something you would suggest for listeners?
All right, that's a good segue. So I have a blog, and you can subscribe to it freely for a monthly, you know, post, or weekly if you want to pay. And I just published today one on the election, which approached, I'm scanning through it now for the end point paragraph, where I say choosing, so this is the US election between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. Choosing between abusive paternalists and lunatics with matches is not acceptable. The successful learning experience involves smaller changes and less powerful change agents. We need authority that we can execute and a scope of action within which the electorate, as decision makers, can remain informed and involved. The burned hand learns best means that you learn from errors you can reverse, not from burning down the house. So this is where I would expand in answering you. I would say that the global situation between being rational and being reflexive, so you can be rational about your job and your family and community, and you can be reflexive about the immigrants and the economy and the, your future, needs to be brought together. We need to be more able to intellectually cope with the emotional threats and triggers in the world. And this is what I say to people in therapy on a personal level. You've got to be able to embrace in a intentional manner the things that you're afraid of. It comes down to the monster under the bed. What is a kid going to do if they feel there's a monster in the closet? You hide under the sheets, then it comes up in your dreams as nightmares. You've got to, like I said to this client, ask the monster what's in its other hand. You know, you've got to make a relationship to the things you're afraid of. And the usual resolution is, this is the way I like to think of it, is that the things you're afraid of, the monsters, the terrors, the agents of fear, the demons, they don't really want to be there either. They're there to deliver a message to you. Instead of sounding scripted, because I've thought of it so many times. Your monsters are there to deliver a message. They're monsters because they're uncomfortable and they're out of their element. They're not necessarily trying to hurt you. They're just trying to deliver you your fears. And they'll be happy to leave. if you'll accept the fear and take the responsibility for your fears. So if, like I call him a friend, but I guess I shouldn't, who's a, adamant Donald Trump supporter. I didn't know him that well, but I know he's one of these country guys who's angry at his situation. And I would say to him in the abstract, because I don't live there anymore, that, what are you afraid of? Why is this lunatic representing your feeling? Why do you want to fight, basically, and destroy what's boxing you in? Because you've created the box. You bought into it. You grew up in it. Why do you think that just burning down the house is going to be a liberating experience for the best of anyone? So, this is how I approach therapy, and this is what my answer to your question. Approach your fears in an understanding that you might be as frightening to your monsters as your monsters are frightening to you. It's reciprocal terror. And, like your experience of having your face smashed and walking down the street with a bloody face. Could you be proud of that? Your resilience and your ability to withstand what could be called a burned hand learning experience? What did you learn from it? What can you learn from the bad teachers who are projecting on you their misery? Can you make allies out of them so that they'll leave? You don't really want to live in an environment of bad teachers and miserable monsters. You want to let them go. And the only way I think you can do it is by making friends with them. They're not going to be your friends, but making an agreed alliance so that you're not going to, you're going to look at the positive and not the nightmare. I don't know. I can't answer the question well, and that means I've hit the nail, right?
You
Because
have,
it's
yeah. No, really, really, that's great. Great way to run towards the fear, befriend it. Yeah, you've nailed it. Um, where can people find you in the blog?
my website is my center of information called mindstrengthbalance.com. Mind Strength Balance. And there I have too many pages. People complain it's too complicated. I don't care. That's your problem. About books and neural training and therapy and entrepreneurship. It's all the same to me. It's life. You want to be fully evolved. And that involves your environment and your legacy and your history and your knowledge and your trauma and your brain. And yeah. So there's a book there. My latest book, I have a bunch. I think yes. If you subscribe to the blog, you get a digital version of the book. Download link for a digital version of the book. It's called, what's it called? Too much thinking in other directions. It's called Operating Manual for Enlightenment. Yeah.
Ah,
And
there you
it's
go.
about therapy, right?
Mm.
So, yeah.
Oh, awesome. I'll check it out. Um, no, I really appreciate your time. Yeah, we'll have to do it again.
Yeah, I'd love to.
There you go, guys. Honest ratings for the show on Apple are appreciated. If you have a guest suggestion, please feel free to reach out on my website at danielthomas.co. I'm also on social media at Mr. Dan Thomas. Catch you on the next episode.